So thank you all for being here today on a Saturday afternoon. It's beautiful weather, and I really appreciate you spending time here today having what I view as very important conversations that we need to continue. So thank you to the organizing committee for having me today and for including me in a group of such distinguished guests. It's really a privilege to be here learning alongside you. So to be quite honest, I struggled quite a bit with what to say to you today. And anyone who knows me, even marginally, knows that I don't usually have a hard time, like most lawyers, talking. Give me a few minutes and I can usually come up with something to say, and getting me to stop is usually the real challenge. But what I was struggling with, I think, about my remarks today was a sort of tension that I feel like I've been struggling with all year around the Canada 150 celebration. And I think it's a tension that's been touched on by a lot of other speakers today. And that being that though there's undoubtedly much to celebrate about Canada, the list can go on and about being Canadian, within that celebration, how much space do we create and continue to create beyond this year to discuss being critical and what work there still is to be done. So my passion, as you heard from my introduction, and my life's work is equality, and in particular, women's issues and gender equality in the workplace. And throughout my career, and even in my studies prior to that, both at Glendon and in law school, I've felt the same sort of tension that I felt in writing this speech, and that's that there's undoubtedly so much to celebrate about women's place in our beautiful country and women's place in our workplaces in this beautiful country. And women have played a fundamental, though often underappreciated, role in making Canada what it is today, both inside and outside of the workplace. And I certainly don't need to list for you exhaustively the many rights and privileges that Canadian women benefit from that unfortunately many other women in the world do not. We enjoy quite a bit of privilege, and I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that today. And the last 150 years of Canadian history have seen everything from women earning the right to vote, to entering the workforce en masse, to lobbying for some of the most fundamental changes to employment standards legislation in this country, to holding public office. And as we've heard from my predecessor, Kristen, we have a prime minister who at least declares himself feminist, which was a big move in and of itself. We have a premier who identifies as a woman, and we've started to have important and long overdue conversations about what it means for women to be empowered in this country and to start holding leadership positions. We have women graduating from professional and even skilled trade schools at an unprecedented rate. And somewhere along the way, we even legally became persons, which was a pretty big deal, and pretty exciting for all involved. So we've definitely come a very long way. And one example that really touches my heart is that in 1915, so just over 100 years ago, a Canadian court actually held that it would be, quote, a direct infringement upon public order and a violation of the law of good morals and public decency for a woman to be called to the bar in Canada. And it wasn't until the 1950s that women actually really started attending law schools in any sort of significant numbers. And today, actually, law schools are graduating more women than men. So how far we've come in just over 100 years. But it really blows my mind that within the lifetime of some people in this room, I could not have become a lawyer simply by virtue of the sex that I was born. And if I wasn't a lawyer, I wouldn't be me. And it blows my mind that not too long ago, women in this country had to make that choice and weren't able to fulfill something that is so important and so fulfilling to me. So we've certainly come a long way, but we have a very long way to go. And I think the theme that I see running through the talks today is that we can certainly be appreciative of the gains that we've made in the case of my work of women in the workplace, but we have to remain incredibly critical and incredibly vigilant about the work that we still have to do. So when I was thinking about what to say to you today, I kept coming back to the idea of this being a love letter to Canada, which was how it was kind of originally billed to me. And when I reflect on the most loving relationships in my life, I think of them as being very honest, the people that you can go to for that frank sort of advice that comes from a place of love and from wanting to see you be and do the very best that you can. And that's really at the heart of what I want to talk to you about today. Because I believe, in my experience, that our collective national identity is very much based on the idea of Canadians being champions of equality and of multiculturalism and of acceptance. And in the wake of the American election, I feel that we've really, what I'm seeing people say is, but we're different, we're Canadian, and kind of resting on our laurels in that sense, that we're much more enlightened and we're not subject to this sort of crisis that maybe we're seeing start to manifest itself south of the border. But I think that we really take for granted, if we take that position, particularly those of us who enjoy some level of privilege, that there's still serious inequality right here, right in the country that we love so much. And there are still many Canadians, and many women in particular, whose lived experience in this country really does not reconcile with this view of Canada as a fair, equal, or progressive place. And I really fell into that trap at the outset of my own career. I knew quite early on that I wanted to be an employment lawyer. I knew that women's issues were important to me, but I really thought that they would be on the fringe of my legal practice. And not long into that practice, I'm only about 3 years in now, I came to the really terrible realization that I could fill my day, I'm not joking, I could fill my day with anti-discrimination work and work on women's issues and work on sexual violence in the workplace. These are not fringe issues, these are not one-off issues. I could do this day in and day out and fill my year. And it came as a surprise to everyone in my life. It certainly came as a surprise to my coworkers. I'm blessed to work for partners in my law firm who are always extremely supportive of the direction that I wanted to take with my practice, but I don't think that they were expecting for me to be able to solicit the type of business and the quantity of business that I've been able to in just 3 years of practice. And it really came as a surprise to me. I graduated with a women's studies degree. I knew all the stats. I knew that there was sexism in the workplace. I had experienced sexism in the workplace, but I had no idea that it was still occurring en masse or occurring at the severity that it is. But the face of workplace discrimination, to be clear, has changed over time. And I think that feeds into the idea that the workplace, the Canadian workplace, is post-gender, that really the hard work is over and we've kind of arrived and we're just fine-tuning now what's going on. So the more common discrimination that I see in my practice now is more covert, but it's no less dangerous. So we don't really see, although it still does happen, believe it or not, women overtly being excluded or fired by virtue of their gender. Occasionally we do. But the cumulative effect of kind of these more covert forms of discrimination and these behaviors that are often unintentional is still the same. It still denies women opportunities, advancement, equal pay, and sometimes it leads to them being terminated or being unsuccessful in the workplace. So many women experience what we call microaggressions, and until you've experienced one, you may not be able to identify one. But a great example would be the use of gendered language. So being called young lady in a business meeting while all of your male colleagues are being addressed by their names. Interrupting women when they speak, or simply not turning the floor over to a woman to speak in a group setting or in a meeting. And lumped in with this is what we call benevolent sexism, so the idea that women need to be protected or infantilized, that they're not capable of certain hardy roles, or that we need to kind of keep them in line or keep them in safe positions for their own benefit, because that will suit their skill set. We also still see women being excluded at an alarming rate, sometimes deliberately, but most often not, from business development opportunities like client meetings, or from internal work events like going to sports games or going out for a drink after work, which may not seem like a big deal, but they really heavily impact women's closeness with their often male supervisors. And it makes it less likely, even in my line of work, to be tapped for big files, to come up for promotion, to be given the kinds of opportunities that see someone kind of advance in the workplace. We still see women weathering a serious lack of mentorship opportunities. It's very easy to find women who are willing to mentor other women. It remains very difficult to find men who are willing to provide or who think to proactively provide meaningful mentorship to women. It's still a real problem in my profession and in others. Gender stereotypes in the workplace are still pervasive, so traits that are framed as admirable when exhibited by men are still given a negative spin when they're assigned to women. So men are seen as assertive, powerful leaders, while women are aggressive or emotional or bossy, and we still see that very gendered language. So a really interesting study done by Fortune showed that women's performance reviews are still often largely based on their personality traits, while male counterparts' reviews focus on tangible work product or actions in the workplace. So outrageously, this blew my mind. 76% of women's performance reviews in this sample included a negative personality criticism, compared to just 2% of men's. So there's still quite a dramatic disparity there. And research supports that women are also still subject to higher scrutiny in the workplace, even when they do achieve high power, high profile leadership positions. So a study out of Arizona State University showed that all else being equal, 1 in 4 female CEOs of a Fortune 500 company will face some sort of shareholder activism during their early career. And 0 is the statistic. It's negligible % of men need to worry about the same. So you can see there that there's this heightened scrutiny even when you control for all other factors. And of course, these difficulties, and Kristen touched on this as well, they're compounded for women who are marginalized in other senses. So women of color, women with disabilities, those whose immigration status is precarious or for whom English is not their first language. Indigenous women continue to experience significant marginalization and underpayment in the workplace, as do trans women. And so when we emphasize that we've come so far and that we've kind of arrived and the worst is over, we really silence these women's daily lived realities, which show that differential treatment and exclusion in the Canadian workplace is still very much alive and well. And the effects of this differential treatment are clear. I don't think I need to run through them in any detail, except to say that the glass ceiling is still very much intact, and women are still underrepresented in senior management across a variety of fields. There are serious retention problems with women who do rise to managerial levels across a variety of professions. And statistics show that women suffer a variety of ill health effects, ranging from a loss of self-esteem to serious mental health issues as a result of workplace discrimination and violence. One of the clearest indicators of the work still to be done is the gender wage gap, which I won't go into in great detail because Kristen's covered it as well, except to really emphasize that 74 cents on the dollar factor, which is still to me unbelievable that there's that large of a gap. And that gender pay gap exists in every province and in every major occupational category in Canada. But more disturbing still, that gap has barely closed over the last 20 years, even as women's educational levels have statistically surpassed those of Canadian men. So internationally, we're really not the rock stars that we think we are, at least not when it comes to gender equality in the workforce. And as Kristen touched on last year, our ranking fell from 19th place to 35th place. So we're actually not getting better, we're getting worse, and we're falling behind the curve. So as a loved one who wants to see Canada do and be its best, it's time for some tough love about gender equality in the workplace. We're not leaders, we're falling behind the curve. We're failing in our moral obligation to ensure equality in the workplace. Our businesses are becoming less competitive as a result. And we're costing ourselves money, to be quite honest. A recent report suggested that even incremental progress in gender pay equality could lead to as much as a $150 million boost to Canada's economy by 2026. But we're not going to get there by maintaining a holier-than-thou attitude. We're not going to get there without continuing to have the kinds of discussions that we're having today. We're going to have to get there through universal childcare policy, through increased legal protection with respect to employees' caregiving responsibilities, through changes to parental maternity and paternity leaves, through policies and initiatives that encourage girls from a very young age to get into STEM fields, to pursue the skilled trades, through supporting female entrepreneurs, through developing non-gender segregated mentorship opportunities, both within and across individual workplaces, through constantly asking how we can make our workplaces more inclusive. A simple starting point is just making sure that informal social events are open and accessible to all. Through calling out on a daily basis in our conversations with friends and coworkers and families the microaggressions that we might let slide but that keep our peers behind. Through holding businesses accountable by spending our dollars on organizations that aren't just talking the talk when it comes to equality. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, and I hope we continue this conversation later, it's through being self-reflective about our own privilege and centering the voices that are often left out of these important conversations and critically examining and working on our own unconscious biases. So my sincere hope for Canada going forward is that I'm out of a job, or at the very least that my days look a lot different. I would love to see a Canada in which I don't spend time reacting to situations that happen in the workplace and incidents of gender discrimination and violence. But I would love to see a world in which my job is to proactively assist employers in heading these incidents off at the pass, in preventing issues, and in implementing meaningful policies that develop and support intersectional diversity in Canadian workplaces. So in short, we've come a long way, but we still have a very long way to go. Thank you for your time.